I got a brand new sweetie, better than the one before. Oh, she's got everything and a little bit more.
Hello, and welcome to Additional History, Headlines You Probably Missed. I'm your host, Tiffany Clark, and this is episode 262 of the podcast. Today's episode is a full-size episode, so that means I'll tell you just a little bit about why the date of the episode is famous, or infamous, and then I'll tell you 3 other stories that were making headlines in newspapers around the globe on the exact same day. It's a great way to get a feel for what the world was like when other important events were happening. If you want to see the actual headlines and pictures from the historical event, you can find this episode on YouTube now. All my sources will be at the end of the YouTube videos as well. If you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, you'll know that I cover a wide variety of subjects. Some of the historical moments are good, and some are not so good. Today's subject falls into that latter category. And I'll be honest, I didn't know about this event until maybe a year ago. It happened during my lifetime, but I was pretty young and I don't have any memory of it. It's just not something that's talked about a lot, at least not where I'm from. Today's episode date is May 13th, 1985, and I'm taking our headline from the Philadelphia Daily News out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The front page is made up of one headline that takes up half of the front page, and a picture that takes up the other half of the page. The next 11 pages were filled with information about this story. The headline says, "Stalemate follows Move Gun Battle." Friends, this is the story of the 1985 Philadelphia bombing. Don't remember it? Don't worry, I'll give you the summary version. MOVE was an organization that was founded in 1972 by a man named Vincent Leapart. Shortly thereafter, he changed his name to John Africa, and that's the name most people knew him by. The group, which has been described, even in modern publications, as a, quote, cult-like organization, was officially called the American Christian Movement for Life. But everyone pretty much just called it MOVE. At least back then, the organization was mostly made up of black members, but white members weren't excluded. The group is an anti-establishment and anti-technology group, and they follow a strict diet of raw food, too. Mostly ate things like fruits, veggies, nuts, and eggs. They didn't believe in medicine, and they didn't like the clothing style popular in Western cultures. They didn't use flush toilets, preferring to use outhouses instead, and they got rid of their garbage in their yard. Children who were part of MOVE weren't allowed to attend school, and since they had never watched television or eaten cooked food, they were considered to be pure members of the group. Sometimes the members of MOVE would go to zoos and pet stores and protest the businesses, but the group was never violent. They also fought against police brutality. The group set up their headquarters in a Philadelphia neighborhood that was kind of known to be a haven for political activists. But by 1976, the neighbors were complaining about their group to the police. They didn't like the unsanitary conditions at the 3 townhomes the group occupied, and they didn't like that the children would just be playing out in the yard without diapers on. Well, knowing that the group didn't like the cops, and because of complaints from the neighbors, the Philadelphia Police Department decided to set up a 24-hour surveillance near the group's headquarters. As you can imagine, this didn't make MOVE very happy, and they started being a bit more aggressive. They would sit on their porches holding rifles, and they would use a megaphone to lecture their neighbors. This show of force started to make people nervous. To counteract the surveillance, MOVE started leaving bomb timing devices in locations around the U.S. and even in London. There weren't actually any explosives involved with the timing devices, but the group left notes stating that they would leave the real bombs if the Philadelphia police didn't back off. The fights between the city and MOVE continued and hit a peak when a gunfight in 1978 resulted in the death of a policeman, James Ramp. 9 different MOVE members were arrested and charged with his murder. Not long later, the group relocated to a row house in West Philadelphia, on Osage Avenue. But, just like before, many of the neighbors weren't happy having the group in the area. They were known to take flea collars off of the neighbors' pets, feed wild animals, and again, leave garbage in the yard. Like before, neighbors reported that the children looked malnourished and would sometimes dig through their garbage cans looking for food. Oh, and they pulled out the megaphones to harass their new neighbors. This was actually a political move by the group. They wanted to get the mayor's attention so that he would release the 9 men locked up for the murder of James Ramp. They also started stockpiling weapons and building a bunker of sorts on the roof that was made of steel plates and railroad ties. Okay, so there was a lot more back and forth on the government's part and on MOVE's part, but now that you know a little bit about the background, let's skip forward to today's episode date, May 13th, 1985, when everything came to a head. On that day, Mayor Wilson Goode gave an order for the police to raid the MOVE headquarters. They were going to arrest some of the members for having illegal explosives and for making terroristic threats. But because the members were hunkered down so well inside their home, the police tried to force their way in. And a gun battle ensued. It lasted for an hour and a half. The police fired over 10,000 rounds of ammunition. They also used explosives to blow a hole in the front of the house. But the fortifications the MOVE members had made earlier held, and they were still safe inside. So, the decision was made to drop a bomb on top of the headquarters where the bunker was. Yes, you heard that correctly. They decided to drop a bomb from a helicopter onto a home, knowing there were children inside. Now, to be clear, I don't think the bomb was intended to blow people up. I believe the idea was for it to just destroy that bunker at the top of the row house so that the police could gain access. Unfortunately, it did a lot more than that. The roof was covered in tar, and there was a gas tank in the bunker. When the bomb was dropped, it set off a massive fire that quickly spread to other parts of the building. Instead of calling in the fire department to put the fire out, the police let the bunker burn until there was nothing left. It burned for just over an hour before they even made an attempt to stop it. By then, it was way too late to control the situation. The headquarters was a complete loss, and the fire quickly spread from home to home to home all down Osage Avenue. 61 homes were burned in Philadelphia, and another 110 had damage from the fire. It was absolute chaos. 250 people were left homeless. So, what about the MOVE members? When the smoke finally cleared, 11 people inside had died, including the MOVE leader, John Africa. And sadly, 5 of those people killed were children. As you can guess, although people didn't agree with all of MOVE's ideas, and many were supportive of the police's actions, not everyone was happy with how it all went down. 3 of the surviving MOVE members sued, and the next year a jury awarded them $1.5 million. I believe MOVE still exists in Philadelphia today, but on a smaller scale. The last member that had been in prison for the murder of James Ramp was paroled back in 2020, but he has since passed away. Okay, that was a doozy. There's a lot more I could say, but I think you've gotten an idea about what this famous day was famous for. Although I can't promise that the additional history stories will be any less shocking. It is time to open some more newspapers and see what else was being reported the day chaos reigned in Philly. Today's first additional history story was probably as big of a deal as the main story, and in many parts of the world it got much more coverage. Although it's been 41 years since this event, those who were there for it still remember it clearly. I'm taking our headline for this story from the Post-Crescent, a newspaper out of Appleton, Wisconsin. It says, "Soccer fire linked to hooligans." This unfortunate event took place in Bradford City in England, 2 days before the bombing in Philadelphia, on May 11th, 1985. Last year, on the 40th anniversary of this event, people who were there that day said that they remembered it being a beautiful day, with the sun out and a lot of happy people. The Bradford City soccer team was hosting Lincoln City for the end-of-season match at their stadium, known as Valley Parade. It was an old stadium, originally built in 1886, so it was 100 years old at this point, and it really hadn't been changed or updated in at least 75 years. Bradford City had already won the title for the season, something they hadn't done since 1929. The stands were packed with fans, excited and eager to watch their team play one last time for the season, and officially be awarded the coveted trophy. The game was going well, but then, about 40 minutes into it, smoke suddenly started pouring into the stands. At first, people didn't really know what was going on, and there was immediate panic. Everything changed when flames and a roaring fireball appeared just moments later. People knew they were in trouble, and they began to run as burning timbers fell around them. Many of the people climbed over the walls and onto the soccer pitch as the fire continued to spread faster than anyone thought possible through the wooden grandstands. Some of those at the top, especially the children, decided to take their chances jumping down from the top of the grandstand. The drop was about 20 feet to the concrete and grass below. Spectators who already made it out reached to catch the falling people. Others tried to escape through the turnstiles, the same way they'd come in, but they had been locked after the game started. In just 4.5 minutes, the entire grandstands were in flames. But the crowd was moving quickly, and although it was a chaotic scene, people were getting out of the fire's way. Surely everyone got out okay, right? Sadly, that wasn't the case. When the fire was finally extinguished, and crews could get into the rubble to look around, it became clear that this was a very deadly fire. Body after body after body was pulled from the ashes. The bodies were burned so badly that it took many days for all of them to be identified. The final body count was 56. 56 people died in the fire. More than 260 were burned, some severely. Friends, this wasn't an 1890s tenement fire. This was the 1980s. It shouldn't have happened. Since nobody had cell phones back then, it took people a long time to know if their loved ones made it out okay, since so many got separated during the melee. In one case, a man jumped over the wall and onto the pitch. He turned around to make sure his elderly father had gotten over the wall okay too, only to realize his father couldn't climb up and over the wall, and his father didn't make it out. Another man ran onto the pitch, fully engulfed in fire. Spectators ran to him to smother the fire. Even the Bradford City players got involved, catching children as they were tossed over the wall onto the pitch. And the police and firemen who came were heroes too. Some of them went back into the mess over and over to pull people out, getting burned themselves. And those on the ambulance and hospital crews worked tirelessly to save the injured. Now, I read a lot of accounts and details of that day, and I debated back and forth with myself on how much to share. But ultimately, I decided to leave many of the gory details out, especially since so many survivors are still around today. just know that what the people in attendance that day witnessed was horrifying. You can see why this story was making headlines around the world. Soccer, or football, if you're not from the US, is a big deal. People have their favorite teams, and cheering them on is a great pastime. But nobody ever expects the fun to turn deadly. If you remember from a few minutes ago, the headline for this story was "Soccer Fire Linked to Hooligans." Apparently, not long before the fire broke out, witnesses saw someone throw fireworks and smoke bombs into the crowded wooden grandstand. Fans yelled, some saying, "Who threw that smoke bomb?" But the culprit wasn't seen. Could it be that a stupid prank took the lives of 56 people? Parliament immediately began looking into the matter, especially regarding safety. In fact, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher said, quote, "We have two things to tackle, both the safety and the hooliganism." Well, despite the many initial reports I read about pranks gone wrong, it was ultimately found that a cigarette was the cause of the problem. You see, there was a big void area under the stands, and garbage would get dumped under it, not always cleaned up. People didn't ever walk under the stands, so it didn't seem like a big deal. But on that day, someone dropped a lit cigarette under the grandstand, and it ignited the garbage below. The flames reached up and began burning the stands. Those who realized what was happening tried to get a fire extinguisher, but there weren't any around. The people in charge purposely left them out for fear of vandalism. The disaster, again, should have been avoidable. After the fire in Bradford City, the United Kingdom stopped building wooden grandstands, even ones that were already in the process of being built. They also banned smoking in the stands. Probably a good idea. In the aftermath, 50 people were awarded commendations for their bravery and heroic efforts during the fire. And a memorial to those who lost their lives was built. The truly sad thing in all of this was that the grandstand was set to be demolished and rebuilt as soon as that game was over. The diggers were already on site, ready to go. It just had to make it through one last game. And it failed. For my second additional history story for May 13th, 1985, I'm taking a headline from the Daily Nonpareil out of Council Bluffs, Iowa. This headline says, "Dotson will fight to clear his name." Now, this story doesn't sound too exciting just from the headline, but this case actually turned out to be very important in the world. We'll have to go back in time from 1985 to give you a full picture of what was going on. But just know that I could spend an hour talking about this and still not get through all of the details. So again, you get the abbreviated version. Gary Dotson was born in 1957, and although I don't know much about his childhood, I do know that he was a high school dropout who lived with his mom and sisters in Country Club Hills, which is a suburb of Chicago. In July of 1977, Gary's world was suddenly turned upside down. One night, police were on patrol when they came across a girl, 16-year-old Kathleen Crowell, standing on the side of the road. She was covered in dirt, and her clothes were messed up. The police stopped and asked Kathleen if she was okay. She told them that she worked at the Long John Silver's restaurant at the nearby mall, and after work, as she was walking across the parking lot, a car pulled up next to her. There were 3 men, young men, inside, and 2 of them jumped out of the car, grabbed her, and threw her into the back seat. They tore off her clothes, assaulted her, and then one of them got a broken bottle and scratched letters onto her stomach with it. It was absolutely terrifying. The police were equally horrified, and they rushed Kathleen to the nearby hospital where a rape exam was given. They also had her give a description of at least one of the men who attacked her, and an artist drew up a rendering of what the perpetrator looked like. Then they pulled out a book of mugshots and pointed out some of them that looked similar to the man she had described. Kathleen pointed to one of the mugshots. It was 22-year-old Gary Dotson. Right from the start, Gary denied having anything to do with the assault and insisted he was completely innocent. But the jury believed Kathleen, and he was found guilty and sentenced 25 to 50 years in prison for what he did. He wasn't eligible for parole consideration until 1988. With Gary locked up, Kathleen went on living her life. She became very religious, and in 1982 she married someone that she'd gone to high school with. They moved far from Illinois to New Hampshire and started their family. Then, in 1985, 6 years after Gary's conviction, something that had been eating at Kathleen for years came to light. She went to her pastor and admitted that she had made the entire story up. Gary Dotson never assaulted her. Nobody had. At the time of the alleged assault, Kathleen was in the foster care system and was struggling with life. She'd had relations with her boyfriend and worried that she might become pregnant. So she made up the assault story so she wouldn't get in trouble if she ended up pregnant. In the police station, all those years earlier, she really didn't mean to accuse Gary Dotson, but the police pressured her into choosing him, despite the fact that she had described her attacker as being clean-shaven. Yet Gary had a full mustache at the time. Kathleen tried to get the prosecutors to fix the wrong she'd done, but they refused. They said they believed her original testimony and thought her newest story was the lie. Gary's team got involved and fought for his release, but the trial court said they believed Kathleen was currently lying. So Gary stayed locked up in prison. His lawyer decided to do something that has been done many times when results are needed. He contacted the media and told them that an innocent man was locked up, and due to some sort of prejudice against him, the law was refusing to listen. It also came out eventually that in the original trial, their expert witness, a state police forensic scientist, had only taken a 2-day course and was not a graduate student at UC Berkeley like he had said. And he messed up the science used to convict Gary originally. It also came out that during the original trial, the prosecuting attorney had told the jury that hair found on Kathleen matched Gary's hair. Except technology to make a statement about things like that didn't exist back in the 1970s when he was convicted. It was a lie. And the lawyer's actions worked. Gary was released. Well, sort of. He wasn't declared innocent, but he was released on a $100,000 bond on April 4th, 1985, until he could have some sort of hearing the next week. Again, things didn't go Gary's way. The judge said he still believed Kathleen's original testimony more than her current testimony. He pretty much ignored the new information and sent Gary back to prison. He was only out for 1 week. But there was still a lot of momentum and attention surrounding his case, so it was decided that he'd have an official retrial. It was held from May 10th to May 12th, the same day's chaos was erupting on the streets of Philadelphia. Dozens of witnesses testified, and the proceedings were televised, which brought even more attention to the case. The governor himself presided over the hearing, even though he made it clear that he believed Gary was absolutely guilty, and he wouldn't be pardoning him if it came to that. In an interesting move, the governor decided to commute Gary's sentence. Why? Because that meant rather than being labeled innocent, Gary would have to stay on parole, which meant he had to live some very strict rules. If he broke any of those rules, the authorities could immediately lock him up again without having a trial. Meanwhile, Kathleen wrote a book about her story. It was called Forgive Me. She made $17,500 on an advance from the book, and rather than keep the money for herself, she gave all the money to Gary. She really wanted to make things right with him. He promised he wouldn't sue her for what she did, which was a surprising gesture. Unfortunately, prison had changed Gary, and he had a really hard time rejoining society. He started to drink heavily, sometimes having an entire 6-pack of beer for breakfast. Sometimes he would drink until he passed out. Since he was free, Gary kind of gave up on clearing his name, even though his lawyer kept at it. He met a 21-year-old woman named Camille Dardanes at a bar as soon as he got out, and the two quickly became friends. She stayed by his side during the trial, in May. He needed money, so he signed book deals and movie deals, but none of those ever really panned out. Instead, Gary took the money from Kathleen, bought a car, and he and Camille went to Las Vegas to elope. Within 2 months of their wedding, they were completely broke. And by the next spring, they had been kicked out of the apartment they'd been renting and had to move in with Gary's mom. Camille worked as waitress, but it seemed that nobody wanted to hire an ex-con who had spent so much time in the spotlight and was never actually declared innocent. The couple had a daughter together in 1987, and Gary tried to get sober, but it didn't work, and his heavy drinking continued. That drinking proved to be Gary's undoing in August of 1987. Gary and Camille had spent the day at a park, having fun and drinking, but on the way home they got in a fight. Camille was driving, and when Gary slapped her, she stopped the car in the middle of the road. Gary took their daughter and got out of the car. A cop just happened to be driving by and saw the disturbance. Camille told the cop that her husband was a convicted felon who had just taken off with their child. Gary was arrested again for domestic battery, and since he was still on parole, he couldn't get a bond and had to stay locked up in jail. After his hearing, his parole was revoked, and for that one drunken slap, he was ordered to serve 16 more years in prison. This is about the time Gary Dotson's name would forever go down in history. You see, there was a new technology in the works, something called DNA testing and matching, and although it had never yet been used in a criminal case, it seemed possible that it would work. Gary's team requested testing be done on the clothing Kathleen had been wearing the night of the alleged assault, clear back in 1977. It took a while, and multiple kinds of testing, but in August of 1988, the governor, prosecutors, and Gary's lawyer were notified that the testing had been successful, and it proved, without a doubt, that Gary Dotson was not the person who left DNA in Kathleen's clothing all those years earlier. The DNA matched her then-boyfriend, exactly like she said it would. Gary was paroled, not because of the DNA, but just as a matter of time served about the same time, and he was immediately taken to a treatment facility for his alcoholism. The authorities dragged their feet, and it wasn't until a whole year later, August of 1989, that the charges against him were officially dropped. He was the first person to ever be exonerated because of DNA evidence. It had taken him 12 years to prove his innocence, and sadly, it would still take 13 more years before an official pardon was issued by the then governor in 2002. Now, Gary's story pretty much ends here, but I need to at least briefly mention a story that goes alongside it. In 1994, Camille Dotson, Gary's ex-wife, and the mother to his daughter Ashley, was living in Las Vegas. Ashley was 7 years old, and she adored her mother. Camille had been working in Vegas as a dancer and sex worker, and she struggled with drug use. One night, after she had been arrested for drug use, she walked away from the detention center there in Las Vegas and disappeared. She didn't contact her family. She didn't show up for her court hearing. She didn't try to see the daughter that she loved. Police didn't really investigate her disappearance, though. And just a few months after her disappearance, they closed Camille's case, saying it was unfounded. But Ashley knew her mother wouldn't just abandon her, and she doubted that her mother would have stayed off of the police's radar for a long time either. In her mind, the only explanation for Camille's absence was that she was no longer living. But what happened to her? About the same time Gary was officially pardoned, 8 years after anyone had seen her, a new missing report was filed for Camille. Unfortunately, it has now been nearly 32 years, and Camille Dardanes Dotson is still listed as missing. Ashley hopes that someday she will have answers. For my third and final additional history story of the day, I've got a bizarre story for you. This headline comes from the Morning News out of Wilmington, Delaware. But I'm not going to tell you the headline quite yet. This is the story of the disappearance of little Ina Mae Harper. For some reason, I struggled to find any articles about her disappearance until she'd been missing for quite a few days. She disappeared on the morning of April 27th, 1985. Ina Mae lived in North Las Vegas, Nevada, and on the day she was last seen, she had left her home to walk to a convenience store that was 5 blocks away. She had money with her, and she was going to buy 2 cans of soda. Ina Mae was sent to the store by a man who was supposed to be babysitting her. Her mother, Linda Wilkins, and her mother's roommate both worked as housekeepers at a local motel, and both of them were working that day. So the roommate's boyfriend, who wasn't identified in any of the articles I read, was tasked with watching Ina Mae. Now, this was the 1980s, and I know where I grew up, we were allowed to go places by ourselves and do things alone at a pretty young age. But not usually as young as Ina Mae. She was just 5 years old when she left home by herself to walk 5 blocks to buy soda. She never returned. Not that day, not the next, nor the next, or the next after that, etc., etc., etc. Ina Mae was missing. Police searched for her, they questioned witnesses, and people put up reward money. Within that first week of her disappearance, $20,000 in reward money had been raised, and the amount was growing every day for anyone who could provide information on Ina Mae's whereabouts. 30,000 posters were hung all over the Las Vegas area. And pretty soon the FBI got involved and began helping with the search too. The family even contacted multiple psychics, hoping to find her, but nothing seemed to help. A week after her disappearance, there was still no sign of the little girl, and the police were starting to lose hope. One of them even publicly stated that, quote, "The odds are greatly diminished. To be quite honest, I'm just hoping and praying that somebody snatched up the kid and involved her in a black market activity that sells kids. I'd rather have the kid involved with a strange family than find the kid dead." Hundreds of calls of possible sightings came in, but police checked into them and none of them panned out. The only clues the police had were that she made it to the convenience store, although I don't know if she actually bought anything, and then she went next door to a McDonald's. There she bought an ice cream cone and a soda and spent a little time playing on their playground. At some point, she left the McDonald's and stopped at a friend's home. That friend was 8 years old, and she invited Ina Mae to spend the night at her house. They decided to walk back to Ina Mae's house together. But when they got to a busy street, the friend told Ina Mae she wasn't allowed to cross it. So, Ina Mae said she'd go the rest of the way alone. The friend watched as Ina Mae crossed the road, but then she saw the little girl turn the wrong direction. The friend yelled to her to turn around, but Ina Mae insisted that she knew where she was going, and she was taking a shortcut. It was the last time anyone saw her. There weren't any more viable clues. She just vanished. Finally, on May 11th, a full 2 weeks after Ina Mae disappeared, some good news came in. Ina May had been found. And she was alive. Are you ready for me to read you the headline that I skipped over at the beginning of this story? It says, "Neighbors jailed after taking child." Pretty crazy, huh? When Ina May was recovered, her long blonde hair had been cut short and dyed brown. She'd been locked up in a cheap, dirty hotel room near Bakersfield, California, all week with 7 other people. For those not familiar with that long, mostly desolate drive, Las Vegas and Bakersfield are roughly 300 miles apart from each other. All 7 of the people found in the room were related to each other, but only 3 of them were arrested in Ina May's kidnapping. The ones arrested were 21-year-old Kathy Tomlinson, her 18-year-old brother Donnie Weems, and their uncle, 42-year-old Lloyd Elder. Also in the room were Carol and John Thompson. Carol was the mother of Kathy and Donnie, and Estelle Elder and her husband William, who were the grandparents. The crazy part is that Ina May knew this family. They were neighbors of her and her mother. Ina May's stepfather said that the family had babysat Ina May the previous summer, and he never really trusted them. So why did the family take her? Why did they kidnap an innocent 5-year-old? Great question. The neighbors, or rather former neighbors, believed that Ina May would be better off with them. They said that Linda was an unfit mother who didn't take care of her child. And one of the people who took Ina May said that they tried to get help earlier, and even reported Linda to Child Protective Services, but nobody would help the little girl. So they decided to take matters into their own hands. Linda insisted that she was a good mother who kept her house clean and worked hard to provide for herself and for Ina May. But Estelle Elder, the 75-year-old grandmother in the hotel room, said, quote, "Our love is the only reason we had that baby. She has a way. There ain't nobody that can keep from loving her." When they took Ina May, they bought her a Cabbage Patch doll, which was the ultimate gift in 1985. And they told Ina May that she needed to start answering to the name of Stephanie. They planned to raise her as their own, and had no intention of ever returning her to her real family. The family was broke, though, and they didn't even have enough money to cover more time in the rundown hotel where they were staying. So, what happened to the kidnappers? I'm sorry to report that I have no idea. I tried, I really did, but I couldn't find any more information. I'm sure it's out there, just not in the newspapers I have. Hopefully, they were punished for what they did. For today's advertisement, I've got something unique. It's not actually an advertisement, but rather another article. One that's advertising a movie. This ad/article comes from the Daily Star out of Hammond, Louisiana, on May 13th, 1985. The movie being talked about was called Murder in Space, and the movie was set to be released on July 28th on Showtime. The movie starred people like Michael Ironside, Wilford Brimley, Martin Balsam, and Arthur Hill. And this is how the newspaper described the plot. Quote, "Murder in Space is set in the not-so-distant future, aboard the spaceship Conestoga. During the return voyage from a mission to Mars, the multinational crew find themselves with a very terrestrial problem. Someone seems to be systematically killing them off. Since the mission is manned by scientists from several different countries, including the United States and the Soviet Union, the events in space take on international implications. If the craft is permitted to land before the killer, or killers, can be found, he, she, or they may escape through a political maze of political intrigue." Here's the catch about this movie, though. Everything had been filmed and was ready to go, except the conclusion where you actually find out who the murderer was. None of the actors or staff or even the director knew how the movie ended. The ending wouldn't be filmed until after the movie was released, and the script was locked up in a secure vault. Why would they do that? Well, it was because they wanted the Showtime subscribers to have a chance at solving the mystery first. They were hosting a contest to figure out the conclusion, and the winners would be awarded $60,000 in cash and prizes. The conclusion was then aired 2 months later on September 14th. 9 contestants who had entered the contest were eliminated one by one after competing to come up with an answer closest to the real solution. Prizes were given in the US and in the UK. Friends, thanks for joining me for today's episode. Did you know about the Philadelphia bombing, or was it something new to you? If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, make sure you do so, and feel free to leave a review on whatever platform you use to listen to it. If you want to reach out to me with comments on this or any episode, or with suggestions of subjects to cover, you can do so by emailing me at additionalhistory@gmail.com. And don't forget, this podcast is now on YouTube as well. Then join me again in 2 weeks from today when I'll have an all-new mini-episode. I'll tell you about just one subject, but trust me, it's a crazy one. Talk to you later.